season 13 of Mention and Dispatches.
Yeah.
It didn't even occur to me we're recording this right after Labor Day, but over the Labor Day weekend, we had our 6th year anniversary. So we've had the doors open for 6 years now. It's not really one of those milestone anniversaries you make a big deal out of, but hey, it's been 6 years. So, it's kind of cool.
You're ready for kindergarten.
We're ready for kindergarten. So the dulcet tones you hear in the background, we've got Rocky is back with us after spending the summer goofing off, visiting some family, playing some games, importing some games in other languages, some magazines and such in other languages. If you followed him online or track back to him from Tuesday Newsday. So Rocky, what was the gaming highlight of your summer?
The gaming highlight of the summer, I think it's just the fact that we sat down and we got back into playing games. A lot of good games come in, but most best part is just sitting down around the table and playing some games. That's why you play, right? We're going to be talking motivations tonight, right? So what's the motivation? To play.
To go have a good time.
We'll talk about more.
Yeah. And then and Mike is here. Mike is back. We were going to go ahead and have our semi-occasional irregular co-host on for at least the season premiere here. So, Mike, what was the gaming highlight of your summer?
They're all highlights. I'd have to say, if I had to pick one, I think actually getting around to playing GMT's U.S. Civil War. I've been wanting to do that for a long time, and I finally started it. So probably my highlight so far.
So far. Well, I mean, the summer's over at this point. So
not when you're retired. No, you would think that. But when you're retired, summer continues through winter.
Well, I would say lack of things to do, but we all know better. So yeah, we're on to season 13 here. A couple of sort of admin-ish announcements. First of all, you hear the little snippet, sort of semi-commercial in the middle of all these episodes, but we do want to take a moment and thank all of those Patreon supporters. Our regimental patrons is the highest level we've got. The folks at that level, first of all, look, they get a free ticket to any of our events. So things like the Fall Assembly or Connections Online or the ACDC, they get free tickets to those. But they also get a shout out on the podcast, and so we'll go through them by name when that little commercial pops in. But we did want to make sure, hey, thanks to our regimental patrons that allow us to cover the costs of doing these things, hosting the podcast, the recording software we use for it and all that. So huge thanks to them. And if you're interested in doing that, hit the site and just follow the little Patreon link up at the top. And you can go take a look at what we've got for our Patreon folks there. And then also for anybody, whatever podcast platform you choose to listen to us on. Google Podcasts, they sort of shut off, but whether it's Spotify or whether it's through iTunes or whether, wherever it is that you choose to listen to us, please take a moment, just leave us a quick review. Having those reviews helps us bubble up in the searches for people looking for other wargaming podcasts. So having those reviews is an indicator to the hosts that, hey, more people are listening, more people care about this, it must be worth recommending. And so they will start to recommend us more and more. So that'd be kind of cool if we can start bubbling up more in those recommendations. With all of that admin crap out of the way, let's talk about wargaming motivation stuff. So Vance, our good buddy Barthart, had put a note in the forums that he was having kind of a hard time really getting into one of the particular games. And I think, Mike, was it a Most Fearful Sacrifice? It was a Gettysburg game. I think it was that one.
Yeah, it was that one, yeah.
All right. Look, Vance lives north of the wall. So the fact that somebody not from the U.S. is playing a Civil War game, I always find mildly amusing, at least, just because sort of where is the hook for those folks to be interested in a game about the American Civil War. But he was having a bit of a difficult time finding the motivation for how the different sides should play. What should he be caring about within the game other than just sort of it's this abstract maneuver sort of exercise. And so that kind of inspired, hey, let's make a podcast topic out of this. And so, Mike, it was your idea to make a podcast topic out of this. With that as the lead in, take over, man. Where are we going with this?
Well, that's it. We're done for the night. Thanks for showing up, and we'll see you next time on season 14 of Mentioned in Dispatches.
Yeah.
Now, I can't remember if the problem that he was, that was pretty much the problem, is kind of as you stated, but wasn't it also the fact that he had it set up for a pretty long time and he was just having a problem getting back to it on top of everything you just said?
Well, yeah, I think the Battle of Gettysburg had settled into the Siege of Gettysburg at that point. I think it had been stationary for a bit of time there.
And he was just kind of trying to figure out, I guess he was having a problem motivating himself to get back and see how it unfolded.
I think that had something to do with it.
And that devolved into a discussion on the forum about, not even necessarily if you start a game like that and you start playing it, but what drives you to play the game to begin with. In this case, it's, Gettysburg. What's your motivation for, hey, I want to play a game on Gettysburg? And I think I responded in the forum that a lot of times before I'll play a battle like that, I will go and maybe watch a movie and maybe read a book and maybe watch some documentaries on it. I mean, YouTube has a lot of National Park Service documentaries on the Civil War, for that subject. So I'll go watch a few of those battles, and that kind of helps to put me in the mood to play those games and to sit down and actually play them through.
Yeah, not a bad approach. Rocky, what about you? When you're sitting down to first approach a game, what is something that helps motivate you to dig into that?
Well, the first thing I look at is what's the game about? Topic, theme, history for whatever it is. I mean, if it's got to be something that has some interest to me. I'm big, of course, with the moniker like Rocky Mountain Navy. So if it's a naval game, I tend to give it a second look, third look, say, is there something here? Is it an interesting piece of history?
You're the master of navel gazing.
Well, something like that. But the point is, I mean, I start off, my first motivation is just simply, does it have a topic that interests me? The history, and is it something that these days it used to be like, oh, it's a Midway game, yay! Hey, it's another Battle of Guadalcanal game, yay! But these days, I have to say that the interest runs to the maybe lesser topics. Hats off to Vance for playing a Gettysburg game. I think I'm pretty much past playing a lot of Gettysburg games because it's just. It's almost, the history's there. I play the game because I'm interested in the theme, but that leads to the second part of the motivation. For me, many times I'm playing it to learn something. Maybe learn, I mean, Mike already talked about this. Learn a little bit more. Go dig into the history. One of the games I got this summer, Battle of Calcan Go from Princeps Games. Battle of Calcan Go, Battle of Nomonhan. A lot of people heard about it, Zukov, right before World War II kicks off in Europe. There's, I knew the basics about it. I knew a little bit. I had a book on it. So, hey, this looks interesting. Dig in, take a look, and play it while reading or just after reading to see, does it reflect? Does it learn? How can I be educated by the game? Many times books they try some very good maps, but sometimes not so good maps. But wargame maps tend to be really, really good and helpful when you're reading the book to sit down. Sometimes you can even just literally, sandtable the book on your board, and it just learns more. So the motivation for me, it's like a process. I got to have some interest. I got to do some learning, and then I play with the game and I experiment and see what more I can learn. So, Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's exactly. I mean, I watched a video the other day. It was on Gettysburg, and it was a wargaming channel. I can't remember the name of it. I have to look it up while we're talking. But it was basically, they were asking what would have happened if John Hood had gone around Little Round Top and came in from behind versus just going head on. And they actually played it out and, kind of answered the question. Well, here's what we found out why it wouldn't have worked. But they played it out to see. And it's like you're saying, you'll read something in a history book and they'll talk about the what ifs. And I've always loved the what ifs and, history anyway. But they'll talk about the what ifs, and you can actually sit down and try it out. You can say, okay, I'm going to see what happens if Lee decided not to fight at Gettysburg and he pulled back, and tried something else entirely. And you can do that with a war game, with the right war game. You can do that.
Yeah, a lot of war games you can sit there, and I think some people always the common trope. Oh, I can do better, or maybe I can do better. Hey, Robert E. Lee, you're really nothing. I can do better.
If only they'd done this one thing.
Exactly. I mean, I figured it out. You know, the rest of nobody else has figured it out. I have the answer. But that is also part of the motivation, is you get in there. And if you for myself, it's getting in and looking at the decisions that were made. And when I'm playing a game and looking at it, I'm going like, wow, yeah, I can understand why that decision was made, or why was my decision different? What information did I have that was different that led to a different condition? So it all comes down to, I mean, war games, yes, you're playing against an opponent, but many times when you're playing the war games, you're really playing against yourself, and you're playing against yourself saying, what did I learn and how can I do it better?
And so in this particular instance, he was playing, solo. He wasn't playing against anyone. And so, I play a lot of solo games. And one thing I do before I sit down and play out a game like that is I will come up with a plan for each side. So I'll determine, what does the Union want to do? What do the Confederates want to do? And I'll write it down. And, have a notebook when you're doing this. Write it down, write your plans out. They're going to change. You're going to have to update your notebook. But have a plan to begin with and see how it executes as you're playing it. And it's going to change. And as it changes, update your plan. And to me, that's motivation to play too, because you're wanting to see what happens next.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to the whole, I can solve that problem, or if only they had done this one thing, that would have fixed everything for them. And I think one of the things that this ties in a little bit with the motivation piece, but also with the, what do you change and why and how? I think one of the traps we fall into, and war games absolutely allow this by and large, because there are very few of them that put the appropriate sorts of straitjackets on folks, is that we tend to approach things not with a period appropriate eye to what's going on. We want to approach things with a completely different approach to how somebody might doctrinally operate on the battlefield, with absolutely no consideration as to whether or not the people at that time could even conceive of operating in that way. We tend to approach with all of those little colorful counters. Yeah, they represent people, but ultimately we care about the abstraction of the values that they provide to us in attack and defense and mobility and support and whatever quantification of their capabilities we have. And for instance, we might completely ignore the fact that one dude was adult and even writing in monosyllabic words and drawing him a cartoon, he's still going to go the wrong direction. We may completely ignore the fact that two commanders just absolutely did not like each other. And if you told them to, march up a hill side by side, they're going to race up the hill because they both want to get there first and show up the other guy. Those sorts of things are very real things you contend with on the battlefield, but rarely show up in the games. That where you find out about those things, Mike, it goes back to what you were saying, is what if any sort of knowledge do you bring to the table? What's the prep work you have? What do you already know about the topic going into the game? If you're doing a Sicily game and you've seen Patton, you know why Patton hung a left from the beaches of Sicily and went the wrong way first before coming back to meet Monty, at the other end of the island. He was trying to show off. But you have an understanding of why that happened that you wouldn't get just being given, here's the operational plan, here's what you're supposed to do based on the original invasion plans, now go do it. Patton fights his way through the tough hilly ground, running parallel to Monty, who's working on his tan out on the coast. This came up in a podcast a year or two ago when we had Cole Worley here talking about specific historical periods, and one of the recommendations he made, and this goes back to applying to sort of how you can motivate yourself for a particular game. If you're interested in learning something about a historical period that you don't know a ton about, go read a biography from that period first, because that gives you a very personal look into that period. And then later, when you're reading the broader history books, it's kind of like you've got a friend in the book that's sort of popping in and out and showing up here and there, and you've got something to sort of hang on to. I care about this thing because this person that I know something about appears appears in the story, in the broader story, and this is how this person fits into the larger context. Go read a biography of somebody who was at Gettysburg, and then when you're marching that regiment up the hill, oh, that's where that dude was, and you have a better understanding of what was going on in those people's minds as a part of it. That's a lot of prep work just to pull out a game and punch some counters and sling some dice. But if part of the motivation is understanding what was happening within the period, war games are one of multiple tools that can help you do that. If the whole point is to sling some dice and have some fun with a friend over a military tie, maybe you're not going to do that much digging and reading and learning ahead of time. But, sort of finding a period appropriate entry point with a person who was there and an understanding of how people approached the conflicts of the time might be a way to motivate yourself and dig into it. Rocky, thoughts?
I think what you're really getting at is that, there's such a broad spectrum of motivations, which really are approaches to how you play the game. Any game, we're here talking war games. So some people do just want to pick up a simple game, even a complex. They want to play for fun.
Yes.
There's people out there that play advanced squad leader, complexity, but they play it for fun because they just love pushing the chits, rolling the dice, moving around on the battle space. They just love it because it's fun. Many of them have learned the mechanics of the game very well, so it doesn't become a chore for them. It's just like a second nature activity. So there's a whole group out there that just will honestly just play for fun. I have to admit that on like my Friday night or Saturday night game nights with the family, sometimes we aren't looking for a very serious game. A good command and colors scenario out there, it gives us some flavor. It gives us some challenges, but it's not, we're not playing it because we're trying to, dig deep into the psyche of Napoleon. We got James Ozarski for that one. But if we just want to play because it's a good, decent game that we can sit around. You can have your drink of choice next to you. Don't spill it. But you just simply enjoy your time. But there's other times though, especially like what BB Mike's talking about there, and even myself. Sometimes the more of the solo experience. War games is another form of media. It's another form of how we interact with the history of the world. So, you can watch a movie, passive. You can read a book. Still, that's somewhat, you're actively reading a book, but in many ways, you're just passively taking in the information. But what it really is that I love about a good war game is if you sit down with it, look at how it frames the history, look at its mechanics to see how it's the mechanisms are reflecting the history. Is it doing air-land battle in the Middle Ages? Maybe that's not such a great application of a doctrine, and the rules don't necessarily reflect the reality. But if you find a good game that is evocative of the period, then as you're interacting with it and you're experiencing it in a way that is a very satisfactory time, and I absolutely enjoy it. I love sitting down, learning a game, reading a book, going back and saying, okay, what happened there, and then trying it myself to see, hey, given what was there at the time, was that really? There's a whole range of possible outcomes, but which one can I get? Can I get to that one that was the history? Can I get to the one that was that everyone was expecting, but just didn't happen? How can that happen? And just engage with the game, become part of the game, to become part of the history. I think that's a big part of what a lot of times that Grogners sometimes we're accused about we're being too much into the history, but it's because we're looking to experience it not just simply for the fun of the tabletop, but we really are engaging with the history and using games to do so.
Yeah, that's like telling football fans they take sports too seriously.
Yeah, exactly.
That's sort of the point, If you didn't care about history, you'd be playing Corkle,
I was thinking as you were talking earlier, Brant, you were talking about, approaching a battle, let's say that you're not familiar with, and reading about it and reading the biographies on these guys or whatever. But, maybe another approach would be to take a battle, like something you've never played, like maybe something like Killer Cranky, or just something you've never really even heard of and it's popped up on your radar, don't read anything about it. Set the battle up and play it as the best you think you can do. And then go back and check the history and see how you did. It's like you have no preconceived notion as to what you should be doing or how to approach the battle. I think that would be fun.
Yeah. Well, but again, these are, so, it only took us 20 something minutes to get to this. One of the things that I was curious how long it was going to take us to get to is there are a lot of different kinds of ways that you can motivate yourself to get interested in a particular game. And so, Mike, it might be, hey, I know nothing at all about this. Let me throw it on a table, see what I get. How close did I come to the history? But let me do something with it first and then go compare to what actually happened. That is a different type of motivation. That's almost more sort of a competitive motivation of, or an exploratory motivation, not necessarily a competitive one, more of an exploratory motivation of, hey, what can I come up with here? As opposed to the competitive one of, I'm playing a game of the Alamo, can I hold out longer than the Texans did? And I already know something about it, so I sort of know, I watched the Davy Crockett show when it was on the Saturday afternoon special when I was a kid growing up. So I know who some of these characters are at the Alamo. So I'm trying to hold out longer than they did. That's different from, I understand the history and I want to experience the kind of decision making that these people were going through at a particular time. I thought they made some really dumb decisions, but let me put myself in their shoes in those circumstances where they really dumb, and so there's a lot of different ways that you can motivate yourself for digging into playing those games. This isn't like a scientifically rigorous inventory. I'm just trying to throw out that there are different reasons why you might want to pick one up and run with it. So,
and then, also like Ian was saying, if, you play these games to have fun. And I think I said this to Vance in the post, it's, if you're not having fun playing the game, stop. You want to be having fun when you're playing these games. So if you just don't have any interest in the battle or how it's going, put it aside and play Federation and Empire.
Because if you're not having fun with whatever you're doing, that'll cure you.
Of course it will.
This Federation Empire makes that other thing look so much more fun.
And it's so much quicker to play.
That gets into, there is time and complexity are also part of the motivations to play. Sometimes you have a lot of time, so you are looking for a deep dive. Sometimes your motivation is just, hey, I need something short and quick, which maybe those are the times that you tend to go more towards the fun over the deep learning experience. Sometimes the complexity of a game can be what draws you in. Frankly, if you sit there and you start sort of internalizing the complexity and looking at those game mechanisms and how they all interrelate, and then trying to find the best way to pull the levers of the game to get it to do what you want it to do, there's a tremendous amount of motivation and satisfaction that can come from that too. You talk about Federation Empire, but if you can make that work with there's some special rules in there you probably need to understand, especially like pinning, how that is important to how you move a front. If you can get into that complexity and understand it, there's actually a lot in that game that can be deeply satisfying. And in some ways, that mastering that complexity is a motivation in and of itself. I can beat the system. Not just beat the system. I can use the system. I can manipulate the system. I can discover what the system is trying to tell me. Mark Herman always sits there and talks about his games. He's trying to distill history and deliver the essence of it. Well, what message is he delivering in this game? Is it coming through? Does it make sense? What can I do with that essence of history and to enhance my understanding, or to just play it for fun and see if I can make a different result?
Yeah. I know for me personally, one of the things that motivated a lot of the games that I was interested in growing up, and I'm still interested in today. I grew up for a bunch of years on the ground in Germany during the height of the Cold War. And so for me, it was always fun to get out those Cold War Goes Hot maps and go find where I live. That was always an enjoyable thing. Like, let's go find the hex where I live. And I still do that now. Like I'll get out a map and I'll go, okay, we used to live here and over here. And they were pretty widely separated between 5th Corps and 7th Corps areas. So unless you got a big omnibus map where you wouldn't have the granularity anyway, it's unlikely you're going to find the specific hex I lived in very easily unless you've got multiple games out to work with. But that was, where did I live? Who, which units did I have friends that were a part of? Where were we stationed? Where did we spend time? Where did I have friends I went to school with? Those kinds of things were the things you looked for on the maps for those sorts of Cold War goes hot games. And since the wall came down, now I'm also looking further east and going, okay, I've been there because I've had a chance to travel some through the former East Germany since the reunification. It was 30 something years ago at this point, but still, it's to me, that was always of interest. That was the military that I knew, that I grew up in, that I knew best, that I served in for a while. So that was, it was an opportunity to do on cardboard what we hoped we never had to do in real life, but with something that I actually really knew. And so that was always something that was a personal motivation for me. What are the different ways in which we can model the kinds of things that I happen to know something about? And so that was always something I really enjoyed digging into.
You just hit on a very important point there, and that is the game was personal for you. So if you're going to play a game, many times your motivation is there's going to, what do I get out of this? What's the hook in this for me? Those games were, hey, this is where I lived. This is, those were the days when, we never knew when somebody was going to get called away on alert. Did you have your NEO, your non-combatant evacuation bag ready to go in the closet? So there's a different personal connection there. Even when Mike was talking about, to reading a book, he's building a personal connection. Go read about a biography. Go build that personal connection. And sometimes it just goes again all the way, all the different spectrum, all the different extremes. Sometimes your motivation is, I'm going to sit down and play a game against somebody else and just make a personal connection that we're having a good social time. But it all ultimately comes down to what do you personally want out of the game? And if you, hats off to all those reviewers out there who just take in games and review, because I don't know where their personal motivation is coming from other than a financial compensation somewhere, because I find it very hard myself to pick up a game if I don't have some sort of a personal connection. So yeah, to Mike's point, if I don't know what's going on, some of these magazine games come in, I don't know. I haven't not really dug into that topic, but it's sitting in front of me. So hey, go off and read a book, go off and do some research, internet, and see what I can find that's going to spark that interest in the game for me.
Yeah. And then I think another thing that may, motivate you to play a game, and we'll take something like Gettysburg again, because there's, how many games about Gettysburg, but once in a while, someone will come out with a new mechanic, or hey, we're going to put cards in this or something that's different. Or maybe the designer has something else he wants to say about the Battle of Gettysburg that maybe hasn't been said yet. And so you're going to hear about that and read about that and think, oh, well, I want to try this. So you're going to end up playing the game.
The lucky 13th season of Mentioned in Dispatches is made possible by our fantastic regimental patrons, who joined our Patreon at the top level. The Armchair Dragoons would like to thank Michael Sundberg, Andy J., Fred Stogg, Joseph Knorr, Hellcat6, Chet Bell, Stagger Wing, Kevin Bertram, Patrick Garrity, Mike Quigley, and Fred too. Their support of the Regiment of Strategy Gaming helps us bring you the best strategy gaming article, events, and this podcast. You can join us as a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/armchairdragoons. Cheers!
You mentioned sometimes you're just sitting down to play a game with a friend. That I actually had that back in July, where our regular Wargame day here locally is first Sunday of the month. Meet over at Gamers Armory, and we've got a community of wargamers here that get together and we'll play. And because it was over 4th of July weekend, a bunch of folks were bringing some American War of Independence games with them and throwing those on the table. We still had some dudes playing War at Sea, but a bunch of us got some Revolutionary War games out. And it's not a period I'm deeply interested in. I'm familiar with, I can play the hits. right? It's kind of like it's kind of like somebody's favorite band, right? I know the couple of radio hits, but I'm not going deep into the catalog. And so I, one of the guys had one of the Saratoga games. I think it was the one from TPS, and I understand the importance of Saratoga. I know, its meaning within the context of the American Revolution, but I never really sat down and played much of a battle on it at all. It wasn't something that had ever, I never really had much motivation to really dig into the tactics of the battle and how it actually unfolded and what did the terrain look like and how did people approach it. I think that might have been the first time I'd ever actually played a Saratoga game. And it was fine. It was fun. It's not something I'm going to run off and go grab 5 more Saratoga games to compare and contrast. I'm not grabbing a biography of somebody who was at Saratoga to really dig into it. But as an afternoon of slinging dice and pushing units around and having a good time with a friend, and it was a game he was particularly interested in giving a whirl, okay, fine. I'll play the Brits and let you, shoot us up. And I actually turned out I was kind of kicking his butt a little bit. Let's.
Of course you were.
Yeah. I bunkered down on a pair of hills, and he made the foolish decision to leave his river protected positions to come attack me up the hill. And that was a bad idea. And I had some fortunate die rolls on top of a bad idea. So turned into a really bad idea. I'm still convinced there was one particular rule we were playing very, very wrong, but I've never really gone digging for a clarification on it either. In any event, it was a good time playing a game for the game's sake, not necessarily as an exploration of the history, because it wasn't something I was terribly interested in. But I was willing to be the guy on the other side of the table for someone who was very interested in it, and that was cool. That was fine. I got no problem doing that to sling dice with folks when they just want to have a good time playing a war game sometime. Mike, I know that never happens to you because you're always motivated to game with yourself.
That's true. It depends on the game, like you said, though. Yeah, one thing we haven't really talked about, though, and this kind of goes back to what Vance had brought up. Let's say you've got a game on the table like Most Fearful Sacrifice. You've been playing it for a week and a half. You're halfway through it, and you're just, reached the point like he's talking about where, I kind of feel like I'm halfway through this game and I want to finish it. What can I do to motivate myself to finish the game once I've started? I don't think we've really talked about that yet. And I'm trying to think of some reasons that you could use to finish out that battle. So I'll let Brant go first and tell us what he would do.
We actually had that happen at work one time back when the original World at War series was out. I'd brought Eisenbach Gap to work with me, and we set it up. We were in some of those quad style cubicles where everybody kind of has a corner desk facing away from each other, but you had big chunks of space between you that had sort of desk counter space there. And so me and the guy I shared the cubicle with, we threw Eisenbach Gap on there, and we're just playing the first scenario. And it took us a little while to really get into it, partly because he wasn't as serious a war gamer as I was, and the World at War 85 series isn't the easiest thing to just pick up as a new war gamer. And so it took a little bit of time to get going after some fits and starts. But then work commitments kept us from playing for a while until we finally got back to it. And what really actually kind of kickstarted it for us was we switched sides. And so we each had to kind of pick up where the other one left off. And it had been long enough, it was almost sort of like approaching a new game. So we didn't really necessarily remember, hey, what were you trying to do over here? That wasn't really a factor. But switching sides did kind of give us a bit of a motivation for, all right, let me see how I can pull this off. And that worked in that particular circumstance. So that's a way to do it. May not be the right.
It's a little harder to do solitaire, but yeah, that's a good idea.
You put the mirror on the other side of the table, dude.
I suppose so. Yeah. Or you do like I said, and if you have a plan drawn out, come up with new plans for each side.
Yeah. Rocky, what about you?
If you're not feeling it, then it needs to just be put away, and you move on and find another piece. Now, I mean, if you're fortunate, you may have a way to like put it away, slide it away, keep the counters out if you have space and stuff. I mean, who those people are, I don't know. I've never met one.
I was going to say, who does that?
But I mean, nowadays, you have, if you're like Mike there, you have the plans. Maybe you take a picture of where you were, and you can just maybe come back to it later when you find that motivation again. But I mean, there's so many games out there today. There's no reason in my mind that you would sit there and say, I'm not doing anything else until I absolutely have to finish this horrible slog. No, Nope. That's it. Clean it up. Next one. Get the next one out. Maybe go to a light something. Get your mojo back, and then go dig into. Or maybe you just need to set aside some time and go find that book. Go read, hunt the postman down until you get your next GMT P500 delivery, which shows up, few and far between sometimes. But I can't see punishing yourself to get something through. I mean, just if you've taken in, you've internalized as much as you can, and you're just not feeling it anymore, move on. There's lots more out there that you can enjoy, and ultimately, that's what you got to do. Enjoy. Don't punish yourself.
Yeah, I think that's the actual answer to that situation. I mean, how many games of Civilization on the computer have I abandoned halfway through just because you lost interest for whatever reason? It's like, I'm off to something else now. There's so much.
Somebody else beat you to the Forbidden Palace. You're like, well, screw that. I'm gonna go play something else now.
Or you're using tanks and everybody else is using spearmen. It's like, why am I playing this?
Yeah.
Where did I mess that up?
Hey, look, if you find yourself in a fair fight, you failed. So, I'm just curious. You mentioned sort of put the game away if you're just not feeling it. Don't force yourself into something that isn't fun when it's supposed to be about the fun. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily apply if you're like under contract to be a playtester or developer. You sort of have to work your way through that. And maybe part of your role is to figure out how to make it more fun. But just assuming you're doing these things for purely recreational purposes, I am curious. And Mike, I'll let you answer first. But as a percentage, have you given up on a higher percentage of games that you weren't enjoying or books that you were reading that you weren't enjoying?
Books. I don't even think about that. It's easily books.
Rocky, what about you?
I'm probably about even.
Yeah.
I mean, for me personally, I try to get through, a game a week, a book a week. New game a week, a new book a week, trying to see what I can dig down deep. Not necessarily a book about the game, but just a book that I'm reading. So sometimes I guess maybe they run hand in hand. I get to a week where I'm just not feeling any motivation. I don't finish the book. I don't finish the game. So, I mean, I call it about even.
Yeah, I think I've given up on way more games than I ever did books. And I think for a long time, I sort of felt guilty about quitting books midway. And then sort of senior year of high school, I had a couple of them assigned to me that even though they were assigned, I just couldn't finish. And I was like, I'm just not. I'm good. I'm done. And my senior high school AP English teacher didn't seem to mind that I couldn't quite get all the way through. Like, all right, you got the main point. Good enough. Keep going. And so it wasn't until late teens, early 20s that I was willing to consistently just give up on a book if it wasn't holding my interest. And I've probably got about a dozen of them around the house now that I just quit partway through because they just weren't hanging on to me. Whereas games, especially if I'm playing with somebody else, I'm not going to just bail on that, in part because I don't want the other person to pay the price for my lack of interest. I'd rather try and find a way to maintain the interest for that social interaction there. And Mike, I know that doesn't necessarily apply in a solo situation, so I get that. I am curious to what extent the graphical presentation of a game has ever impacted your motivation for playing it or avoiding it in either direction. That, hey, this isn't a topic I'm normally interested in, but damn, that looks cool. Let me go check it out. Or, I really ought to like this, but man, that's ugly, and I just can't get through it. Rocky, any of them jump out at you?
I guess I'm an old grog nerd that grew up in the 70s with gaudy 8-color printing, where you had your choice of pink or blue, yellow, mustard yellow, green, and that was about it. I mean, if by today's standards, go look at a game like Victory in the Pacific or something like that, and the gaudy colors. Go look at some of those early GMT games. Pardon me, not GMT. Pardon me, SPI games. Simonson, great graphic artist, but man, he was not given a color palette like you get today with the like Cole Worley's company and that sort of stuff. Yeah. I mean, so to me, and I know I'm not up with the times here, I absolutely adore a very simple graphical game. I mean, go get original Steve Jackson Ogre with the off cream colored map and your cut yourself out black and white counters. Literally one side was black, one side was white. I mean, that was it. to me, the graphics, and I guess this is why these big games these days that are these giant Kickstarters with the bajillion, little true little figures and all this sort of stuff. It doesn't. I need more in a game than just those looks. Now, some of those games, hey, it looks great. Yeah, that's nice. Okay. Sometimes it helps, but I mean, for me personally, I am an old grognard.
Yeah, I think the best comparison there is Redmond Simonson got one of those little 4-color crayon packs that you get with the kids menu at the restaurant, and today they've got like that full 64-color box of crayons that they get to work with to do things. I think that's a bit of your comparison there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mike, what about you? Has there been something that just looked so awesome you really had to go grab it, or looked pretty dreadful and you're like, man, I ain't touching that?
I'm kind of like Rocky in that, and it's probably an age thing again, where it's the graphical presentation isn't super important. I have seen things that made me buy them. So that, and you were talking about, what was it? God, it was the World War III thing from Lock and Load, the big,
World at War 85.
World at War 85. So when that came up,
So when Mark Walker owned the company, it was just called World at War. When David Heath got it and rebooted that rule set, they labeled it World at War 85 to distinguish from the original, because the counters aren't compatible with each other. The maps aren't compatible with each other. They're scaled up and they're different typography. The unit values are largely the same, but most of the rest of it is not cross-compatible.
So that's an example, though, of a game when they kickstarted that thing. It's not in my area that I even enjoy gaming, but the presentation and the amount of work and detail that went into that game, I had to back it because it was a beautiful game. But I think overall, I'm not really into the graphical presentation that much. Now, there are some older games where they'll have a red counter with black text on it or something that's annoying. But if the game is good enough, I can deal with it. I have a big problem with games that I don't have a footprint for. So I've got something like Absolute Victory, which is 3 giant maps, and I've got nowhere I can lay out 3 giant maps and leave them up and play that game. So that's actually a bigger deal for me than maybe the graphical presentation.
So I'm guessing you don't have a copy of Mr. President on your pool table anywhere.
And again, I have Mr. President, and I don't have it set up. I can just know where to set that up, that I can leave it out. Now I know there's Tabletop Simulator. I could do it in that. But I'd rather play something physically than on a PC. So, yeah.
So I will say one of the reasons I asked the question is Bob popped up in the forums talking about Burning Banners from Compass. And look, that is a gorgeous game. I've seen it in person. The Players Aid guys had it at Buckeye Game Fest. That is a beautiful game. I don't know how often I would get it to the table to justify getting it. That's never stopped me before, but it is a gorgeous game. Now, I know Bob has been one to play some of the larger fantasy 4X-ish war games in the past with, especially playing online multiplayer with some of the guys. So the idea of a fantasy war game, I don't think was completely beyond the pale for Bob, but he's never really talked much about doing it as a board game. But he seemed particularly motivated given how good it looks. And I can totally understand that. There's definitely something to that. Like you guys, look, I started playing back when you could have single color counters with a single color of ink on it. And when you started to see SPI games show up that had green counters with black ink and green counters with white ink on the same counter sheet, you're like, whoa, that's cool. That's different colors. This is neat. I've got different shades to work with. That was kind of cool. I do think there are some games today that the graphics really are damn impressive. I think there are some games today that are insanely ugly. And I think part of it is we gave people so many tools to work with that the range of options is so wide that you're going to have ones that look way better than they did back in the mid and early 70s. And you're going to have ones that look way worse than they did back in the mid and early 70s, because the array of tools that, you know, Simonson and others had available to them back then, while it didn't allow them to get overly gorgeous, it also didn't allow them to get overly ugly either, because it was only so far in either direction you could go. All that said, I will say I find Rick Barber maps gorgeous pieces of artwork and would happily hang one on my wall as decor in the office. I can't play a game on a Rick Barber map. I just can't. I've tried. I can't do it. I appreciate all the work that he put into those things, and the guy was a master craftsman, but as a game tool, I find them unusable, and I'll stand by for the hate mail from everybody, and that's fine. They're gorgeous. I just can't play on them. It's not enough there for me, or maybe it's too much there for me.
Probably too much. A lot of detail on those maps, but I love them. I'll play on them.
Yeah. So, but that's you know, Bob talking about the Burning Banners game in the forums is what made me think, you know, do graphics have an impact on motivation? And
yes, they do.
Yeah,
and I would say they do, because as much as like Mike and I and you too, we're the old ones. These days, many times, if we want to entice someone to motivate them to play, the graphical presentation becomes a factor. I sit down with some of these hex and counter games with my boys, and they sort of like roll their eyes and they're like, what's this old stuff? Even though it may be a great game, but if I pull out a good commands and colors, something with the dudes on the map, the little plastic figures or something like that, it opens up the avenues. Opens them up to sitting down and starting to play the game. So there's still motivation there. Graphics can help motivate the maybe mildly or even the uninterested into at least exploring, opening up their mind to explore the game. I just fear that finding the good balance, it always comes down to a balance. And I think some of these big games and these giant Kickstarters out there just take it so far that it becomes, I don't even think they realize just how much they become a turnoff. They're certainly doing fan service to their fans, but how much are they really doing a turnoff to new gamers or other gamers who would maybe join in later, just because it's too much of a graphical bonanza.
Yeah. And I think part of that may come back to the expectations of the audience based on who you are and what you're putting in front of them. That may be a piece of it also. Because I think if somebody had done Burning Banners, somebody other than Compass had done Burning Banners, and it wasn't just a bunch of very gorgeous counters being pushed around on a hex map, but somebody decided they wanted to make stands of minis for all those different units and combat cards with all their stats on them to keep on the side of the map. And, oh, hey, one of the stretch goals is going to be 3D map tiles so that, you know, you can actually put villages out there with it. I think that would have been hunting for a very, very different audience than who Compass normally appeals to and who probably ended up buying the game.
So the other thing, though, is like I posted an unboxing of Divine Right today on the site, and I was a little shocked. Not shocked because I did the Kickstarter, so I knew what I was getting into. I won't say shocked, but I think it was a missed opportunity that they didn't really do any sort of graphical update to that game. The components are better, so the counters are bigger, they're clearer, they're much sturdier, they're much nicer. The map board it's not paper map, it's a hard map, but it's the same. It's pretty much the same map. But there was an opportunity, and also what came out last year, the World War II campaigns from Compass, which was a reprint of 3 other games that were older games. And again, they just reprinted it. There was no attempt to upgrade the counters or the maps or anything. And I think that's a missed opportunity. I think if you're going to republish a game, and I'm not going to complain about republishing a game because I really wanted Divine Right for a long, long time. But if you're going to republish a game, you know, you've got the opportunity, I think, to make it look better so that it will appeal. Somebody that's going to buy Burning Banners for the graphics, I don't think is going to buy Divine Right, because it's, you know, if you look at them, they look completely different. But it may be, and I don't know, I haven't played either one, but it may be that Divine Right's the better game. It just doesn't look like Burning Banners.
Yeah, my copy of Divine Right showed up today. I cracked shrink on that very quickly.
I know you've been looking for that one for years too.
Yes.
A Grail game for you.
I came very close to buying a secondhand copy of it that I saw somewhere, even at $120.
Wow. Yeah.
The reason I stopped was they wouldn't let me pull it open in the store and inventory it for completeness. If it had been complete, I'd have bought it, but them not letting me check and make sure, I didn't want to take the chance.
Yeah.
This was probably 15 years ago. The store that I was in doesn't even exist anymore. But yeah, I was definitely interested and came very close to getting it.
But now you got a great copy of it.
Now I've got a gorgeous copy. It is a very nice package.
It is. And you know, like I said, they've updated the components, and there's the component quality is top notch, but they didn't really upgrade the graphics or anything. And now in this case, Divine Right is, in my opinion, and again, I'm an older dude, Divine Right isn't to me that bad graphically to begin with. So it's not that huge of a deal. World War II campaigns is a different story.
Yeah, well, but I also think that the audience for Divine Right didn't want would have been very resistant to a graphical update. I think is,
you know, and I think publishers get that too, and that's why you see somebody, you know, here's the original map on the front, flip it over on the back, and here's a new upgraded version for you.
You know, going back to sort of different motivations for gaming, we've sort of stumbled into another one that there may be a nostalgia motivation for some people. Hey, I played this game back in the day. I really had a good time with it. I would like to revisit it because it brings me back to a time where I really enjoyed this part of my life or the games that I was playing at this time in my life. And that may have a lot to do with the number of reprints and new editions of certain things that we're seeing these days, you know, and not reprints of games that's like the third edition printing of one of the Next War series, but bringing back the Russian campaign, bringing back, you know, the way Compass is bringing back, you know, NATO and Air and Armor and a bunch of those other early and mid 80s classics, bringing back some of the GDW things. You know, having Divine Right come back is probably for a non-trivial number of purchasers is a bit of a nostalgia trip, not just that it's a good game. So, Rocky, have you ever hunted down something just because you remembered playing it way back when, and or you really wanted it way back when and couldn't hunt it down, and so the motivation becomes sort of recapturing some of that nostalgia?
Yeah. I mean, I tend to be a collector of games, so it's hard for me because sometimes the reprints I tend to sour on reprints because they don't have that same nostalgia. To me, they don't have the same nostalgia. I'll buy some of the reprints these days if I never had the original, but if I still have the original one, I'm probably not picking up a reprint. So I guess that's a different form of nostalgia.
I think it depends on what the reprint does, though. If you're just reprinting, like I was talking about these two games where it's just a straight reprint versus something that like Axis Empires that came out, which was a reprint, all right, but man, it changed a lot of things. And you got upgrades to just about everything. So in a case like that, you know, it's how can you not get the reprint?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I question if it's really a reprint or it's just a whole new game. I mean, the one that just landed on my table this week is the Bonsai Magazine, which is the feature game is old NORAD from the early days of gaming, but it's the old NORAD game. This one they're calling NORAD 3, but it also involves a whole another module, which is the Russian side of it, PV Ostrani. And then they went in, they found some other popular modules from yet another company that did stuff. So they repackaged it, and it's it's the old game, but it's a new game. So if your motivation is to play the old game there, you're not going to get it because it's not the old game. It's a reprint, update, total change.
Yeah.
From the new one. So what's your motivation? Back to the question, what's your motivation? Play it for interest or play it for nostalgia, or play it just for fun, or don't play it because none of the above.
Yeah, I think that's the danger of doing these reprints. And I think wasn't it Kingmaker that actually released, like I was talking about, where they have the original game with the original map on one side and the original rules, I think, are a separate rule book. And then included with that is their modern take on it, you know, brand new map board, counters, and a rule book. So you've got both in one box.
Yeah.
So you're appealing to
the big thick book reprints of some of the old classic TSR modules are similar to that, where they have the original module, the rewritten newer one that's been cleaned up, some errata incorporated, whatever else, some other background material, designer's notes, whatever. I have X1 and B2 on my shelf here, and they're 1.5-inch thick hardcover books, and so you get the original with the update side by side. So it's probably just the Wargame equivalent of that. As we start to wind down this whole discussion of motivation, one of the things I did want to ask, and we'll probably wrap up with this hopefully short discussion in all of this, if you're, and Mike, feel free to recuse yourself as a soloist here, but if you're finding yourself with an opponent who seems to be struggling with the motivation in a game that you're playing together, what are some ways that it's not like you can necessarily just call time and go put on a movie and say, here, watch this, and that'll get you into wanting to come back and play some more? What are some things you can sort of do in the moment if you find your opponent's motivation flagging and may need a bit of a boost to sort of get through what you're doing? Rocky, what do you think? Any thoughts?
So what I've done at times is sort of taking a little bit of a pause, and just talk a little bit about where if we're playing a history game, a historical conflict simulation of some sort, take a little bit and just sort of talk through some of the highlights or importance of the battle. What was, if I can find a way to explain to the opponent what the problem that was there in history that they're trying to solve, and show them or somehow motivate them to place themselves in that same condition, and maybe in some ways help them maybe see their way through that. Hey, there is, the game may be looking hopeless here and such, but that's sort of what the way it was, and yet they were able to pull it off. So again, the motivation comes back to, can you do as good as or do better? Sometimes it's just a little bit of maybe that's the benefit of playing with my boys, because I can play dad and say, hey, let's take a short 5-minute history lesson here. But even when you're just playing with strangers, it's like, why did I find this game interesting? I found this game really interesting because I never knew this about the battle, something like that just helps them reframe themselves in the game, and find their way to try to slog it through to the end. By that same token, though, sometimes you got to sit there and go like, hey, you're really not feeling it, and I don't want to force you. So, we got a little time here. Let's pick up this other game, a little short, little fast, sort of filler game. We go in, because again, maybe most of the times you're not sitting there because you're trying to teach them something. You're there for fun, and ultimately that's the motivation. You got to find your motivation and make sure that you're playing for the right reason, and not lose sight of that.
Yeah. Mike, what do you think for those times when you have had a different opponent across the table from you?
See, this is another one of the many, many benefits of playing solitaire. You don't have to worry about this kind of thing. Usually when I'm playing with somebody, it's usually me is the one that wants to quit. And it's usually because it's like my wife, she'll own like 47 of the spaces of a 50 space board. And I know that there's 3 spaces left. It's going to take us another hour to play. And I don't want to play because there's no way I can win. I have no motivation to continue. So I don't know. I can't really answer the question. I just, if I'm not motivated to play it, I'm done. Now, if I were playing in a big, let's say we're playing something like Here I Stand, where you've got 6 or 7 people involved and I just wasn't feeling it. Well, I'm going to keep playing because you don't want to leave 5 or 6 other people hanging that are really into this game. Right. So I'm going to stay in the game and keep playing. And the motivation may be just to keep these other people happy because they're having a great time. But yeah, so it's a hard one for me to answer, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, but I think there's something to being a magnanimous opponent, and just because you're not having the time of your life doesn't mean you want to necessarily deny somebody else having the time of their life.
Right.
I think it becomes an issue if you're playing with the same people repeatedly and you find yourself constantly not having a good time repeatedly with the same folks. That might be indicative of some other issues you want to address.
Yeah.
But I think for a one-off game, here and there, it wasn't the best time I was ever having, but I wanted somebody else to be able to enjoy it. Okay, fine. Let's keep playing. As we wrap up tonight, Mike, do you think we're any better informed on wargaming motivation than we were when we started all of this? Have we provided our listeners something of value here?
I mean, maybe. I think that wargamers in general, I think when we sit down to play these games that we're more motivated to begin with. And I'm sure that Vance, when he sat down to play A Most Fearful Sacrifice, was motivated to play it. I mean, he said he went for, I think, a week or 2 weeks. So clearly he was motivated to start playing the game. So yeah, I think maybe we've helped some people. If not, we'll do another podcast. There are things you can do to motivate yourself. And I think we've addressed some of those. So maybe we've helped some people.
Yeah, let's hope. Rocky, what about you?
Well, I was walking into this podcast the day after Labor Day. I got to admit, I wasn't very motivated, but but after having this conversation, no, I mean, I have to agree with Mike. I mean, there is nobody wants to call themselves an exceptional breed of some sort, but war gamers, we tend to have maybe a broader spectrum of going into some of these games than maybe some other parts of the board gaming community do. I mean, we certainly play for fun, like I hope everybody plays for fun. But along the way, we can also find and mix in those other pieces. I mean, we didn't even touch tonight upon what wargame practitioners would talk about as motivation for gaming. I mean, not just having a sponsor that's trying to ask you some questions, but what motivations do you have to try to research an issue or something like that? And in some ways, even commercial, just hobby gamers like ourselves, it's the same thing. There's what's our motivation to learn and explore and have fun at the same time. So I think we got some of the ways. And if people are out there and you're not feeling it, you can't find your motivation, look at yourself. But ultimately, at the end of the day, just make sure you're having fun. Because that is what a game is for more than anything else, having fun.
Yeah. And I think, again, with the usual caveats of we're talking about straight up gaming for fun, not, hey, you're under contract to be a developer and therefore are required to play this game to meet your contractual obligations. And we're not talking about something in a professional context where there's a job related to this, right? We're talking about purely just sitting down having a good time. And I feel like we, more than most other wargaming communities out there, do need to clarify, because we do actively seek and bring in those professional opinions and professional participants on a regular basis. So, let's draw the distinction where it's necessary to make sure we include those. As folks are hearing this, you've still got time, roughly a month, to get your affairs in order to come join us at the Fall Assembly. All three of us will be there. Rocky, you're still planning to be there, right? I mean, assuming no work blow-ups.
That's the plan.
Yeah, and Mike, assuming no work calling you out of retirement blow-ups.
Right. See, so all three of us are going to be there. That's motivation for you to go to the Fall Assembly.
Yeah. So we're back at Gamers Armory again this year. We are going to be in the store one more year. We're hoping we're big enough after this that we're able to shuffle out of the store and have a different facility where we're not dependent on the store, helping us out with the hours to work with there. But also that will make it a little easier for some potential publishers who happen to be near enough us to show up to make it a little easier for them to show up and have some of their games with them without having to go through the store to be selling them. But for this year, we're back in the store, which is probably a dangerous thing for some of the attendees, because Mike, you went home with how many games from the store last year?
Probably 2 or 3. But the other thing too, Brant, is if we don't grow and we don't need a bigger space next year, we get smaller, we can have it in your garage.
Yeah, I got to fix the garage door first. Because right now the one of the springs is busted. It doesn't open.
Actually, no, I am looking forward to having this at Gamers Armory again, because it was a great location, and yeah, they've got a great selection of war games there, and I did come back with probably 2 or 3.
Yeah. I'm not sure anybody hit double digits of game acquisitions last year, but I think there were a couple people that tried. It wasn't the locals; it was the out-of-towners that I think a couple of them tried. So, but yeah, we are going to be back in the store again this year. We're still going to kick off Friday afternoon and run through later Sunday afternoon. And look. We've got half the store to ourselves. We're going to throw a lot of games on tables and sling a lot of dice. This year we've actually got a bunch of different Civil War games after having only one last year, because we've got, Mike, your 2 Rebel Fury games, but we've also got a couple of other, like I think it's the Great Campaigns of the American Civil War. We are going to have a Library of Napoleonic Battles game in there. It's going to be something from the 1809 campaign. We still won't get Ozarski to show up for it, but it's going to be something from the 1809 campaign. And based on the number of people that register to play, the GM will pick a scenario that's appropriate for the number of people that are there playing. And Keith Tracton's going to be there with Raider Drop Zone. If you want to come learn Air and Armor from Bruce, you've got the opportunity to do it. Let Bruce teach you, because he's going to join us again. So we're looking forward to having a good time. We've got a couple of kind of oddities that we're going to have there also, because Peter Robbins, who is one of the locals here, but also does a lot of stuff with the defense folks through the different Fight Club series, Fight Club International, Fight Club UK, Fight Club US. I know you're not supposed to talk about Fight Club, but we're going to talk about Fight Club. They had developed a very simple war game called Take That Hill 2-3 years ago, just to help get people used to the idea that war games can help you teach some very basic infantry tactics and then grow from there. It was an entry-level war game specifically for the military folks, so it had to be tactically accurate and still be an entry-level something they could do. Well, they've expanded that basic system into Take That Street, which is a similar thing for urban combat. Peter's going to have a copy of that with him, so you'll get a chance to see a NATO training war game that's actually not available commercially. So this will be a rare chance to give it a play. And I think I may just have to drag my copy of Divine Right with me and hope we can get a bunch of people to sit down and play.
Maybe it'll just motivate you to put it on the table and see what happens.
Perhaps we do that. Cool. Guys, thank you all very much for being here. We have successfully launched season 13 of the podcast. And so we're going to get, about 13 episodes out of this. We'll get to early December, a bunch of the usual things that we do in the fall. We'll talk some convention stuff. We'll talk some
catalog stuff,
some sales stuff. We're not going to spend an entire episode on the Compass catalog this year, I think, but we're going to include the Compass catalog in an episode that talks about a couple of different kinds of sales and holiday things as we get that way. We do have plans to talk a little bit more about some digital wargaming. We've done some with digital wargaming in the past, but I think we're gonna put our arms around that a little more this season and see where we go from there. And who knows what interesting guests we shall Shanghai into joining us in the future. So, audience, thank you for joining us. Rocky, Mike, thank you guys for both being here. We'll catch everybody next time on another episode of Mention and Dispatches.
So long.